Thank you very, very much for joining us this morning. My name is Rosie. I'm Senior Policy Officer at Hope Not Hate. So the session today is looking at what works. So this is the first in a series of events looking at what works for towns across the country as part of our Hopeful Towns project. So today we're looking at building resilience in areas with a far right footprint, so areas where the far right have taken hold or had a large presence. So this is part of a broader project looking at building resilience in towns across the UK. So I'm just going to go over a quick bit of housekeeping. So we've got some really brilliant speakers today. So we're going to make a start with Clarke, who's our policy researcher, who's going to give a bit of an overview of the project and why it's so important that we're doing this. We're then going to look to Luton. So we've got two speakers, Marek Lubelski and Peter Adams, who are both going to be talking about their experiences of Luton, particularly kind of with the rise of the EDL. We've then got Councillor Saima Ashraf from Barking and Dagenham, who is the Deputy Leader of Barking and Dagenham Council and is also the Cabinet Member for Community Leadership and Engagement. We're then going to go to Bradford, to Paul Meszaros, who's the Hope Not Hate organiser, who's going to be talking a bit about partnership and engagement there. So we're going to start with just a quick introduction from Chris, and then each of our speakers are going to be given approximately 15 minutes. If you could just keep an eye on your chat, because I will be messaging you if you look like you're straying too far over, and I will cut you off if you are taking advantage of your time too much, so be warned. But we're going to try and keep it within an hour and a half. So, and the most important thing really is that we get time for questions today. We really want people to be able to make the most of the contributions. So we're going to allow about half an hour for questions at the end, and we will be wrapped up by 12:30. So just a small bit of housekeeping. We are recording the event today, so this will be available for people who weren't able to attend in this slot. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of the chat, so any questions can be put into that Q&A, and we can then bring those out in the Q&A later. So very helpful if you can do that. There is also a chat function, so we ask that you keep that polite and you respect other people's opinions. That can be used for any contributions from attendees as we go on. So just to ask the speakers if you can mute yourselves if you're not speaking, and then we should be able to hear everyone loud and clear. So I'm going to hand over now to Clarke, who's just going to give a bit of an introduction.
Thanks a lot, Rosie. I was literally just going to talk for a couple of minutes just to explain the context for this a little bit. Obviously, Hope Not Hate's work is about, Hope Not Hate Charitable Trust's work is about trying to tackle the far right, but also really to tackle some of the root causes within communities of where these sort of challenges come from, and to understand some of the policy implications for this. In 2018, Hope Not Hate authored a report called Fear, Hope and Loss, which was looking at towns in particular and areas with industrial decline, areas and seaside towns where the kind of hostility to immigration and factors like that had become more pronounced thanks to wider deprivation and economic factors. And more recently, just in the middle of last year, we published a report called Understanding Resilience in Our Towns, which looked at all 862 towns in the UK and tried to look at the range of different factors which might inflame or make hostility or far right threats more pronounced. Off the back of that report, what we've done is we're trying to kind of build this town's leadership network, which is a loose, informal network of really stakeholders, local authority, community leaders, people who work across town communities across the UK, with the idea of just seeking to find ways of sharing sort of experiences, case studies, resources, best practice, just finding ways to make it easier to share some of the things that work in tackling the far right and in embedding resilience in communities. So this is the first of a series of What Works seminars, which we'll be running, and we'll talk a little bit more about what else is coming up at the end of the session. But for now, I'll hand back to Rosie.
Brilliant. So first we're going to hear from Luton. So Peter and Marek, I know you've kind of split your time. I'm not sure if you need to share your screen, but if you do, Frida is on the call, who'll be able to help with that. Okay, success. So I'll hand over to you. You've got 15 to 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Rosie, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here with you. My name is Marek Lubelski. I'm the Social Justice Manager at Luton Council. And my colleague, Peter.
Hello there, it's good to be with you. Thanks, Rosie, and great to be with you all. And I direct a small church-based centre for peace and reconciliation in Luton.
So what we plan to do as a double act is to take you through a story of a town that has been through, as I'm sure you're all aware, some significant challenges around far-right organisation and targeting of our community, and to explore some of the learning we've been through on that journey from different perspectives. And we're mindful that we're coming from those different perspectives. We see them as different and complementary, and that's perhaps something we can explore through the presentation and the Q&A as well.
Trying to move it on, as usual, slag. Come on. I suggest you start talking, Marek. I'm trying to move it on.
Yeah, so really what we wanted to do is just give you a flavour of the place. Luton, as I'm sure you all know, is a small city, large town, 213,000 population, high population growth. Its main characteristics are its super diversity, 55% black and minority ethnic population. It has a young population, one that I think is in the top 3 of the UK, and very transient, 30 to 50% population churn since the last census, and that was 2011, of course. So that's quite a significant aspect of our consideration of building resilience, and kind of that cuts across the story of the town that we're going to be speaking about. Another aspect we wanted to draw attention to is a strong sense of religious identification in the town, and how that plays into people's experience of identity as Lutonians, but from diverse traditions coming together and sharing values around what we need to do as a town. I think that's enough for this slide, just to give a flavour. If we move on to the next one, we were looking back on the risks that we were considering coming out of the challenges of right-wing extremism and austerity in the last couple of years. And of course, all of these apply to a place like Luton in considering the building of resilience. But of course, we've also had the experience of COVID, that plus at the bottom just recently. And I think coming to the end of our talk, the journey we've been on, the relationships that we've built across that challenge have significantly come into focus in the experience of dealing with such a crisis as COVID, and the togetherness and the finding of shared ways of working to resist threat is critical to that experience and the success of it. Moving on, I probably don't need to put this slide up in terms of your image of Luton that might come to mind. Hopefully it's entirely associated with that, but we know from the research and our experience, certainly 5 years ago, that these kind of factors and pictures were unfortunately associated with the town around extremism, from even going back to the 70s and our significant Irish community and the issues around the IRA, but more recently religiously claimed and religiously inspired extremism and violent actions, of course, associated with the town, and that galvanized its focus, if you like, for far right activity and narratives. But moving on again, and Peter, do feel free to jump in on any of this. But I think from our point of view, the one key thing we wanted to emphasise is that lived experience in the town is very different. There are, of course, tensions. There are huge challenges around integration, around social exclusion, but the everyday experience and activity and focus of community-based organisations and the partnership with public agencies is around cohesion, is around building that reality. And that has actually, that resilience, that core narrative has been strengthened massively, I think, through resisting the challenges of far-right organisation. So it's an important message. I think Peter now is going to take you through some of the more granular history on a whistle-stop tour.
Hello again. Thanks, Marek. What Marek has described, the perception of Luton, has very much been something we've had to deal with, but in which we've been able to forge a working relationship. This is a timeline which I think I just put up here really to show the intensity of our work over the last 10 years, and particularly between 2009 and 2013, when we were dealing with the EDL locally. As I said, this is very much a whistle-stop tour, but with one or two key principles. 2009, March the 10th, could have been our defining moment as a town, when a homecoming parade of an army regiment back from Iraq was met by a small Muslim protest, but very much a response from what became the English Defence League. We found ourselves a talking point. We already had our issues, as Marek has said, with Al Muhajirun, a local group, and various associations with Luton, like the 7-7 bombers got on the train at Luton. They didn't come from Luton, but they were associated. And it was all, you read the far right, and it's almost like they had a send-off service in Bury Park, the Muslim area, before they went off. In response to that, we found from March 10th onwards, this huge gathering that over a period of a few weeks led to several protests in the town. And it gradually emerged that Stephen Lennon, who was the founder of the English Defence League, a local resident for a number of years, was at the heart of this. It came to a crunch, particularly in May 2009, when there was a firebombing of a mosque. We as Christian leaders felt we needed to embrace the situation the Muslim community found themselves in and respond to that. And so we called a press conference, which got national coverage, really put a stake in the ground for our working relationship. At a macro level, it was really important the church got involved in this, because the claim of the far right was they were defending Christian heritage. And the use of Crusader symbolism and the narrative of clash of civilizations was going on. We needed to challenge that. But at the local level, at micro level, we were engaging with the English Defence League and their supporters, seeking to understand the personal aspects of their anti-Muslim protest and engage with that narrative. You know, when you find you've got friends of friends who are supporting this new movement, you look and find their church leaders or whatever, you say, where do these people come from? And then you start talking to them. And we were able to get really close in, eventually in time, spending time with Stephen Lennon, Tommy Robinson. At the same time, the Muslim community were really working hard to marginalise the protests of the Al Muhajirun group. We worked closely together in that time. Alongside that engagement, we had all the big protests. We had, you know, a massive protest in 2011, the homecoming group. As a church, we worked closely with the police, with the local authority, with the Muslim community to oppose this. 3 months of really intense planning going into this horrific event. A lot of public order policing, but actually what was really significant and laid the foundation for ongoing work was the low-key community policing that kept and stewarding of protests in the Muslim area. It wasn't just about the big protests though, but what we had, because they were locally based, was the continual rabble rousing around issues in the town. And that all came to an end at the end of 2013 when Lennon left the EDL. It was soon after that that Britain First came into town and started to do their thing and challenged us and so on and so on and so on. And then eventually we worked together with the local authority and the police, got them banned from the town for 3 years and created a space in which we could begin to recover. But I think really that the heart of all this was a deep commitment, ongoing relationship. You know, these people who I was working with in the Muslim community to oppose this became my closest friends. Members in the council and the police became good friends. And actually, we knew that we could work together to change our town. I'm going to hand back to Marek now as he looks at what we've been doing in Luton.
Thanks, Peter. And yeah, just to emphasise that point, I think the relationships born under threat, where trust can develop in hugely meaningful ways in the face of that kind of challenge is a point that has borne fruit. It bore fruit very practically in terms of some of the policies that the council was able to develop in consultation with our partners, civic society, police, and so on, around town centre policies, which restricted, and with business as well, which restricted the activity of demonstrators in the town. That's been extended across from the town centre across other localities now. Similarly, the action that Peter alluded to was taken forward by the police, but again supported by a coalition across the whole community with the council and civic society to provide the evidence for injunctions against the Britain First leaders, which eventually led, I think, to their imprisonment and the falling away of that particular iteration of far right challenge. So, great immediate reactive benefits, but in terms of the narrative going forward, we knew we needed to get a grip on this, and so all of the concerns that were raised around the far right narrative, that it was emphasising division, that it was stigmatising communities. What was coming back from all of our dialogue was the reality of social exclusion, the reality of inequality in the town, the search for social justice, the need to recognise where community organisations organise, that they have aspiration which needs to connect to a vision of the town which is positive. So changing the narrative became increasingly a massive priority, and galvanising our community around a common set of values that reflected this, but that was positive and about change. So I won't go into any detail. I'm sure many places have got similar, but this is our particular one, and it's based on the place. It's based on the vision and perceptions of local people around what our priorities need to be right now. Moving on, please. And within it is a recognition of that strong and empowered community which supports fairness, equality, local pride, speaks with a powerful voice. That is a central part of what we are trying to develop, achieve, and put in the heart of this aspiration for economic recovery, social inclusion, healthier population, carbon neutral environments, even with an airport as our economy. A very, very ambitious vision for us here. And you can move on a bit, Peter, to the next one. And to the next one. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, and part of this is that the messaging. So part of our community messaging is around always emphasizing the value of diversity and the positivity of shared values in the town. And much of of that narrative is woven through a consistent approach to all we do in partnership and how we engage our communities. This has come through in various different campaigns where we focused on young people, on culture, sports and arts as being the future of the town, and positive spaces for identity and organisation to take place. So as we don't have much time, we thought we could finish with some reflection. One of the key themes that I think has come out of that experience is the need for leadership that fits a town with a population like Luton, and the challenges that we faced, and also one which is relevant for the challenges of the current age. And I think these values, which we have woven into our conversation now with our councillors, but also with our community leaders, about, what is it that we are actually standing on together, born of that experience, born of the aspirations that we've formulated. How do we deepen these together? And this is part of an ongoing conversation about leadership in the town as the one of the key aspects of resilience. And
can I chip in there, Marek?
Please do, yeah.
I think one of the things that's really important is recognizing the different skills and different abilities that we bring, the things that we have to do differently, partly because of the responsibilities of public office versus the freedom that I have as a community leader to perhaps challenge things in different ways, different perspectives that come from that, and recognizing we can do different things. I mean, for example, in challenging extremism, Marek is bound by responsibility, and his colleagues are bound by responsibility that the government has under counter-extremism legislation and so on. We have the ability to be a bit more flexy, to get in there, and it's really actually building a trust between us. So we've been very critical of the counter-extremism policy of the government, but actually it's really important to rise above that and stand together in our challenge to stuff, because actually we have the same goal, the same intent. So it's recognizing, respecting, and being able to step beyond that. And I think there's a maturity that comes in leadership when we do that, and there's a trust that comes. And actually, we know that particularly in these really difficult times, the local authority, the local government, public services can't do everything. And we've got to work together for the good of our town. And that's so important. And in that, trust is really important. So we know what we're each good at. And Marek, he's working day job a lot of the time now in social justice issues. And I mean, we've been talking about food bank stuff offline in other contexts. We've been talking just in the last day or so about vaccination to build up, trust in a vaccine, all of these different things. And actually we are working together. That's just so important.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, and if we just move to the final part of my bit, and I think from this experience that Peter's just pointed to is ongoing and continual. There are some key points I think we'd like to offer from that journey that Luton has been on, about the need for that clear and hopeful, proactive, positive vision, that it needs to be based on a recognition of the reality of economic, social, political exclusion, and that is really the root cause of our challenges, even when it comes to countering extremism. That we've got to have that dialogue and that understanding. Increasingly, that the power of social media. I mean, here we are online. We've had a massive response to COVID-19 based on complete online organisation in the town, which we're only just catching up with in terms of its impact and significance. The need for messaging continually. We've seen COVID produce racialized narratives, even though we don't have the far right organising in the town and being on the pace to try and deal with those with the broader messages and the narrative around why that's the wrong way to it's unacceptable, but also the wrong way to address social problems is really important. I've talked about community organisation. We have a massively vibrant grassroots community sector, which needs to be part of that process and linked in. It drives it in many respects, and our policies increasingly reflect that around social value and social justice. And networks, both within and across Luton. Our leader, Councillor Simmons, couldn't be with us today, but she sends her greetings, very happy about the event. And one of the things that she has taken on in her responsibilities is chairing a special interest group for counter-extremism across English and Welsh local authorities. promoting good practice. There are a number of colleagues from the LGA, I think, on the call today who might be able to speak further about that. It complements the work of Hope Not Hate and Resilient Towns very well. But the importance of learning beyond local areas as well as within, I think, is absolutely critical as to what works, and just providing solidarity and help when you're under the cosh. If we'd had a network like that when the EDL first started, I think we would have been even in an even better position.
Just really to summarise from my perspective, again, as a church, we're not big players, but actually we've found that proactive Christian Muslim involvement, particularly in a town where we have such a high percentage of Muslims, is so important, and engaging with local issues together. So, you know, we've been doing work around child sexual exploitation as a cross-community group from different faiths. We've been working together, I mean, on the counter-extremism work. We do that at grassroots as well as, so we've worked very intentionally together around food banks, and things about being good neighbours, about charitable activity. We work together in sort of getting involved in problems, but at the heart of that is a growing together as friends, a growing together in comfort and ease in working together. And it's so critical that we do that. But we do that without a defensiveness, but at the same time strong, rooted in our faith, but committed to our community. And so that really defines who we are and who my Muslim colleagues are. I think that really sums up our approach to it. And thanks very much.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And miraculously, we're on the time. So I'm going to hand over now to Councillor Ashraf, who's going to talk a little bit about the work that's been done in Barking and Dagenham. So Councillor Ashraf, I'm not sure if you're able to share your screen.
Hi. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. So you will be doing the slides, Rosie, yeah?
Not me, I think Afrida.
Okay, so it's Nikki. Sorry.
It's Vicky, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to get them. Can you see them?
Yeah, I can.
Can everyone see the slides now? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Saima Ashraf. I'm the Deputy Leader of Barking and Dagenham. I'm also a Cabinet Member for Community Leadership and Engagement. I'll just start with sharing a bit of my own story, actually. I'm someone that moved to this country around 2005. And I moved from France. I was fleeing domestic violence. As soon as I arrived in the country, very quickly I was abandoned in a homeless unit hostel with my 3 daughters, who at the time were 2, 3, and 5 years old. I couldn't speak a word of English, nor I knew anything about, you know, the country itself, or even, you know, everything that is going on here. But just being parachuted in Barking and Dagenham, I think I believe, you know, in destiny, maybe, you know, or it's all meant to be. But being here and unfortunately going through a lot of, like, you know, as I said, DV, domestic violence, and not being able to move forward in my life. The Metropolitan Police was quite involved into my day-to-day. And very quickly, you know, I joined the Met as a volunteer because I wanted to give back to them, as they had been helping me a lot. Very, you know, at that very time, we also had the BNP in Barking and Dagenham, British National Party. It wasn't really, I would say, a nice time to be, especially when you are not from that area, you do not speak the language, you know, quite, you know, you don't know much about the place or even how, you know, things are working here. And it's just like you know, one morning going to drop my children to school, I met one of my local MP, which is Margaret Hodge. And I asked her for help related to my personal issues, which she did. And eventually I did ask her, how, you know, you helped me, thank you, how can I give back? that's not the question you ask a politician, by the way. And she very quickly asked me to, she said, well, yeah, just, can you do a bit of leafleting? We've got an issue in the area, which is the BNP, and, let's all fight together. And before even I knew, I was just following her to street meetings, coffee afternoons. I started to do loads of leafleting. I was really interested in everything that was going on in the area, but also what she was representing, what the fight was about, which was about racism and fascism. 2007, I joined the Labour Party and eventually started to door knock. And I remember that, as I said, I had no English, so my English was very poor, but I was like good at listening. And I remember door knocking, but always in pairs. And one day I did, do my own door knock. We're talking about an area where, people are not really that friendly. And were the days where like you had doors where, you would be very, abused in a way. But I remember my very first door knocking where I introduced myself as, so we had a line to introduce ourselves, which, hi, my name is, Saima Ashraf. I'm from the local Labour Action team. I would like to know if you have any local issues. Even though I think I've made myself clear here, at the time, very shy, very like low voice, I said exactly the same, but the lady looked at me and brought me a pair of shoes, which was quite like, I thought she was going to hit me with it or something. So I just started to giggle, and she said, didn't you ask for a pair of old shoes? And I said, no, it was, and do you have any local issues? So at that time I thought, well, you need to speak up. You really need to, make your voice heard. But that really made me, that really pushed me forward, because I was thinking, I really love to do this. I really love to talk to people and understand what the area is about. And so in 2010, I first got elected. This is when we got rid of the BNP completely. And 2014, I got re-elected successfully and was then appointed as the deputy leader of the council. To the next, Nikki. But, the journey obviously wasn't an easy journey. We're talking about the days when, deindustrialization. We had the Ford factory in Barking and Dagenham and the council. Those two anchors were actually the biggest employers. So the level of like education wasn't that high. People were like just, finish secondary school and then they would have a secure job to Ford factory, and then the council will eventually look after them and, giving them a property. And so even when we look back now, and yeah, the level of, aspiration was low, but at the time that was good. That was the aspiration at the time for that, so it's about respecting what it was about then. And so we had a population which, it says like white British in 2001, which, 80% plus, and we're talking now at much lower. 55% are from the BAME community in Barking and Dagenham. These are the latest figures. We had the biggest churn in the country at the time. We are now one of the fastest growing and changing borough. In the past, one also of the most deprived borough in London, and all that led to, I will also said, when you have politicians who are like, they've been elected and sitting a bit like comfortably, not addressing the issues locally, not being in touch, just looking at the place going completely downhill, will lead to, a bit of like challenge. And we had not only 11 BNP councillors already in the 2006 elections, but that was growing, campaign was growing, and Nick Griffin was standing to be the parliamentary if he had won, we would have been the first council in the country to be from the National Front. So next slide, please. So the fight for our borough started with, huge campaigns against racism and fascism. We started to engage with, reconnect and, engage with, faith communities, with community groups. It wasn't just a fight for the Labour Party against, or, it was like a whole community coming together to stand against the BNP. Very pleased, that we won this battle in 2010, but it did left us with, with big scars. We were known as like a racist borough. We were known as like, quite deprived. All the negatives were attached to us, unfortunately. But this is where also we were thinking we can't go that, too deep, more deeper than this. So this is where it all begins. Began that, we started to then re-engage with the community. So next slide. So just to give you very quick, so the community structure, so there wasn't that sense of place because Ford factory left in 2002. I'm talking about, the golden days of the Ford factories when they were employing 50,000 people in the borough. The whole, when we had Dagenham being built, this is when, Ford, Henry Ford came and saw that, there's a huge place being built and I like the area, I'm just gonna put my factory there. 50,000 people, now we're talking about 2,000 people. So that huge gap, the demographic change, as I mentioned earlier, 1 in 5 families moving are actually from the BAME community. We had, as a party, 7% contact rate leading up to the 2006 elections. When I mean, personally, I just look back and I'm like, wow, that's ridiculous. I don't know what was happening then, but we need to have a proper contact rate in order to be able to deliver. And also, a very low visible infrastructure in each ward, which means a lot to people. But not only this, a lot of our residents, as I mentioned, the fact that we are one of the most deprived, many of the residents are on some sort of welfare benefit. And being a paternalistic council in the past, they were just expecting the council to do everything and anything. And it was to change all that perception, but also to encourage people to rise their aspiration. And next slide, please. To rise their aspiration. So that's just, this slide just gives you a bit of an idea of, the journey so far in Barking and Dagenham, from the Ford to factory to having, the BNP coming to the borough and growing. That led us to create the Barking model of community engagement. We were, as a party, as activists, and not only as a party, but also, different groups, community groups joining together to come and reconnect, but also, you have to learn to listen again to the community, which led to the defeat of the BNP. 2014, when the new leadership took over the council, that showed that was like a huge task, to turn the tank and make those differences. So we've, going from this, the struggle was from the Barking model of engagement to go to the civic socialism. And also, the ideology was a new relationship with the resident, but also empowering them and in a way that is reciprocal to all the residents. So from 2014, after having an independent growth commission that gave us like quite a few recommendations, but one of those was to have a borough manifesto, which was a non-political one, And that was a first for this council. We had never taken any kind of like engagement or, you know, with our resident to that level. So that was a huge a step forward. Next slide, please, Nikki. Last but not least, the participation and engagement journey. So for us to make those changes, we had to be not only pragmatic, but also being able an enabler. So facilitate the participation and enabling, you know, the community to come together and you know, to know each other. So in 2016, we had Everyone Every Day, which is a project funded by the council in partnership with different funders, such as the Big Lottery, as Urban, Bloomberg's Philanthropy. And that's a platform where you have several activities, bringing people together, choosing what they want to do in different location in the borough. That also, moving forward, we had our faith policy, one of the first in the country. Oh no, sorry, I'm moving forward. We've started to reconnect with our faith groups. We never really had that kind of relationship, but we built on this. And at the same time, then reconnecting with our resident. We have a series of summer of festivals, and at each we do a loads of engagement. We ask people like those, we have a proper conversation, we ask those questions, what they'd like to see, what they like in Barking and Dagenham, what they don't like. That helped us then to have the Good Neighbour Guide, reconnect with the communities, but also having our new VCSE strategy, and also the cohesion and integration strategy. And eventually in 2020, we had our first faith builds community policy, which is a policy that set up our expectations with the faith sectors and vice versa. So overall, I think that's the last slide. Overall, I think that, you know, a lot of work has been done over the years. There is no doubt. But the lesson learned are like the connection with our resident, and also enabling participation, because without bringing the people together, you will not create that kind of awareness. You will not, you know, let people actually ask those questions or give that kind of education or even know about one another. And I know, Peter, you mentioned it earlier. If you knew before, you would have done it. And I remember very quickly, and I'll stop it there, is even myself, when I moved to this country after 3 years of being here, I could see the whole town centre changing very quickly. And as a person that, you know, I was embedded there, and I felt like I was a Barking and Dagenham resident. So that sense of belonging for me was there. But the fact that I could see loads of people moving to the borough because we were one of the cheapest in London rent-wise, I felt uncomfortable. I was like, who are those people? And I could imagine what a person who was born and bred in this place and telling me I don't recognize the place. I could understand what they were coming from and how can we address those issues. So eventually, you know, a lot happened in Barking and Dagenham, and here we are today. So I hope, I know I'm conscious of the time, so I'll stop it there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Councillor Ashraf. I think that was such a powerful personal story, and I mean, there's some real key themes coming from both presentations so far in terms of community engagement. And I mean, I really love this thing that you said about kind of learning to listen again. I think that's going to be a key lesson for all of us. So I'm going to hand over now to Paul Meszaros, who is a community organiser in Bradford for Hope Not Hate Charitable Trust, and is going to talk to us a little bit more about partnerships and the importance of those in tackling the far right. So over to you, Paul.
Magic, can you hear me? I'm going to go back to 2001, which is a long time ago now, but to give some context to what's gone on in Bradford. In 2001, Bradford went up in flames in the riots, and it was caused by 4 members of the National Front drinking in town, just 4 members. the town was on a knife edge for days. And the important thing to remember of that period is that I think everybody made mistakes. Everybody did bad. The council did bad. The police did bad. We were irrelevant if we weren't bad. And a demonstration in town against fascists ended up with a riot in the middle of town that soon spread up into Manningham and other parts of town. And the images of the town on fire went across the world. It were on CNN, it were on every news channel you can imagine. And the reputational damage to Bradford were massive and lasted for years. Everyone came and did a report into Bradford. If you weren't doing a report into Bradford in the year after that, you weren't a report writer. And everyone pointed to how divided the city was, how people didn't mix, how people didn't talk, how people lived separate lives. Somewhat unfair, some of them, but they had a point. There was a sense that the town was on its knees. Other cities can have a riot and you can tidy up the next day and it's not a good event. But in Bradford, it seemed like another one of those and we're finished. The smoke from that night lasted for a long time and scores of ruined lives from the prosecutions that took place afterwards left a bitterness. On the night of those riots, the BNP had a meeting in Bradford that Nick Griffin, their leader, addressed, and there were 150 BNP members and supporters at that. And they loved it. They loved it because they knew that the division and the hatred that was on show was something that they could use, and they did, because from that moment on, that's when they grew in Bradford, and they ended up having 4 councillors and having hundreds of members in the place. So that's an old story. Move on to 2010, and the EDL threatened to come to Bradford, and they call it the big one. It's advertised as the big one because everyone knows that Bradford is defined by race and racism and racial problems. Everyone thinks they know that. And they know that absolutely clear that they want to come to Bradford and they want to cause a disturbance, and that their brand of hatred and division can only grow and prosper if they can achieve that. And I think everyone in Bradford was scared of what the outcome of that could be. They originally wanted to march through a very Asian area of Bradford. They wanted to march through that area, which could only be provocative, and then march into the city centre and hold a rally. Now, I was interested to hear from the speakers from Luton. I thought that were an excellent presentation, and some of the lessons are so similar. Thankfully, everyone seemed to have learnt the lessons of 2001, and what were at the forefront of everyone's thoughts was that we can't have a riot. We can't give them the disturbance that they crave. We can't allow the division to be deepened or exacerbated or used. We've got to resist that. And difficult conversations had to take place. And I was again interested to hear from Luton about, I had a conversation with the police which went down the lines of, what can we do? What can you do? And a recognition that we had to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, what we could do and what we couldn't do, and how that would work. But we ended up in a position where we were talking to the council and the police. We were all working together. Everyone were opposed to the idea of the EDL marching through the area they wanted to march. So we launched a petition. Now, I have to remind you that you do a petition these days and you can get 1 million signatures in half an hour, can't you, on that, the Tinterweb and that. In 2010, it were harder to get. We did actually do a little online petition, and we got about 1,500 names on it, and that were good. But we didn't want to just do a petition. We wanted to use it as a way of engaging with communities. We wanted to bring communities with us. So we did like a postcard for people to sign. that spelled out our commitment to a multicultural and peaceful Bradford. And so we wanted people to sign up to something positive, not just to oppose the EDL march. Now, again, with the connections and people, we could have gone round inner city Bradford and we could have got thousands of those signed. But we knew that that weren't enough. We knew that we needed to engage precisely with those populations and people that might be, that could fall prey to the ideas of the EDL. We needed to go on the harder estates. We needed to engage as broadly and as widely as possible. And it really did mushroom. It caught an idea of ordinary Bradfordians wanting to defend their town. And we did, through the Muslim community, thousands went to the mosques. Through the Christian churches, the whole district got covered. A real key to its success, I thought, was the local paper took it up and ran the petition every day in the paper. And I always felt that the couple of thousand that came back from the paper were really valuable, because it meant people cutting out things from the paper. It took some effort. It meant them posting it back in, finding a stamp and an envelope and all of that. Thousands of people engaging. Thousands of people standing up for Bradford and saying that they didn't want hatred and division in the town. And it really did catch a mood. Now, we were able to go to the Home Office, a sort of joint thing from Hope Not Hate and the police and the council. We were able to get the march banned, but of course, we weren't able to stop their right to have a static demonstration. Now, a real key component of that, managing that, was that we needed to manage carefully where they were allowed to go. And we were adamant that they couldn't be allowed any kind of civic space. They couldn't be allowed a place that Bradfordians feel as their place. And in the end, anyone who knows Bradford will know we were infamous for years for having a hole in the ground. It is now, thankfully, a shopping shed, which is probably shut at the minute. Our aspiration was to have a great big shopping shed, but at that point it was a great big hole in the ground. So that's where the EDL got put, and it was clearly a very second-rate place for them to be. But there were a little message in there. The day itself was fairly predictable. After they finished fighting with themselves and shouting lots of racist slogans, they started fighting with the police. A load of them got arrested. Bradfordians didn't rise to the bait. We'd organised a peace vigil the night before, and we very consciously and deliberately asked people not to counter-demonstrate, because we knew that a big counter-demonstration against the EDL would only help lead to disorder. At the end of 2001, the images that went around the world, as I mentioned, was of a city on fire and a city that was racially divided. The last image that Hope Not Hate broadcast the day that the EDL came to town was of Muslim families bringing down food for the lines of police who were seen that day to have been part of defending the city against the racist mobs. What a very different message we were able to get. I'll just read very quickly. I came across this morning. The local paper, the Telegraph and Argus, wrote the following Monday: in their stupidity and their naivety, the EDL succeeded in doing exactly the opposite of what they intended. They united the people of Bradford of all colours, creeds, races and religions as one. Perhaps even more importantly, they helped our city to lay to rest some of the ghosts of the riot of 2001. They helped prove that Bradford has moved on. It has grown to a point where it can acknowledge and deal with its differences without the need for confrontation and violence. I think what that shows is the resilience that had been built in the city in that time. And that resilience was built by communities working together, by groups coming together, by people earning the trust with other communities, by people being determined that we weren't going to plumb those depths ever again. And the lessons from that have stayed with us. The EDL came back 2 more times after that, and each demonstration they had got smaller and smaller to the extent where they just were irrelevant and they weren't a threat. Now, it's always important, I think, that I talk about this thing about institutional history. I think it's important that we constantly remind the council and the police and other partners of what led to 2001, but also what led to 2010, because individuals come and go. People, the police that I talked to in 2010 aren't there now. It's different people. So we need to be constantly vigilant, I think, and the partnerships that we've forged have to be continually reforged, and the resilience that we've built needs to carry on. Hope Not Hate, for instance, we work in some of those communities that are most at risk from extremist ideas, and we've built deeper roots. I honestly believe that if the fascists turn up in whichever guise it is, in one of those areas, I think they'll get short shrift. We're not able to work everywhere at once. We haven't got the capacity, but in where we are able to work on, in the hard places, I think we've strengthened that resilience, and I think it bodes well for the future. I was interested to hear of Luton's young population. Bradford's got the youngest population in Europe, and it's a tremendous advantage for us that if we can provide opportunities for those people. But if we fail, there's a tremendous, if we leave a vacuum, there's a tremendous difficulties that can be in store. So it's about civic leadership is really important, but the more that we can build those partnerships that build that resilience, I think the better able local politicians will be to better serve our communities. So I'll leave it at that.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Paul. But I think there are some real key themes coming through on this. I mean, I think, a bit of a shameless plug, but the next session that we'll be running on February the 18th is going to be looking at place identity. And I think some of the stuff that Councillor Ashraf was talking about are kind of scars left on communities, and both Peter and Marek have also spoken about that idea of kind of places becoming known as a racist place and trying to deal with external perceptions and a very different reality for a lot of different places. I think we've had some themes on faith and the importance of interfaith work as part of a kind of broader partnership and engaging with some of those. And I think there's some questions as well around engagement and the importance of how you do that, and having a positive alternative to be able to do that properly. So just a reminder to everyone attending to use the Q&A box and please drop any questions in there. So I'm going to start with the first question that came through, and that's for Councillor Ashraf from Hannah Ormston. So you told a very personal story about your own experiences. How can we make sure that stories and experiences like your own are heard by decision makers to address local issues and support community cohesion? So we're going to start with that.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Well, stories like mine, I guess, like it's like to be able to be at the at the table to talk about it, but also to share those stories. I think there's a lot of learning into this, because it's just my own personal story, but I know there's a whole journey behind it, and a lot of people were with me. It's not just me. A lot of people were with me, having all different kind of like walks in life. But unless you are at the table to make that discussion, unless you get involved, and it can be in the council, it can be in schools, it can be like in a faith group or whatever you feel like, because now we definitely have to think outside the box. It's not, just having or waiting for something to happen. We need to be the movers and shakers. We need to literally push people. I really appreciate there is in all the discussions, I know that, faith came quite strongly, and regardless of being like, practicing or not practicing, or less or low, whatever you want to classify is, I feel like unless we have a connection or an engagement or participation with groups and various groups, things are not going to move forward, because it's like you're turning your back to an issue. And it's not also one size fits it all. So we have to be very careful here. What happens in Bradford, for example, is not the case in Barking and Dagenham or in Luton, but there are also a lot of similarities as well. In one borough, we look at wards differently. What's happening on one street can be different on another. So I think it's really about, acknowledging that there are similarities as well as differences, respecting those, being able to be at the table to discuss those, enabling others to do so. If it wasn't the fact that I was pushed to, I was like, oh yes, encouraged by MPs, by other colleagues in the party, or by, other people to, oh yes, you can do it. Because for me, the reality is up to 2014, I was not a person that would come forward to speak, because I would listen, I would do things that I like, but I would be extremely scared because I used to think, oh, English is not my first language, I can't speak English. And that was something that would always refrain me. However, I had my ideas, I had everything that I wanted to change, I knew exactly what. But unless there is that encouragement, not only to groups, but individuals, and that being able to enable others to do things, or to put their word across, I think it's really important. I hope that answers a bit the question.
I think so. I'm just going to bring Peter in on this as well. You're waiting to speak.
Thank you, Saima. Thank you, Rosie. Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned even closely with my Muslim colleagues is that often as a white Christian leader in a community, I have more power than they do. People listen to me. And that's really been important at times with the local authority, with the police. I know when we were planning for the EDL demo in 2011, a Muslim colleague and I were on the police gold reference group, and we were regularly with the police, and I had an ability to challenge them that my Muslim colleague was not able to do. They just wouldn't hear him. And so actually that working together, being allies, working together, hearing each other, making space for each other is so important.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to turn to the next question that we've had here. So how do you market community engagement and replenish relationships across different demographics so they feel they have ownership of the change strategies? So I'm not sure if anyone wants to start with this. Maybe Marek might have something to add.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. And that's a great question. It kind of comes off the back of the last one around, encouraging voice and also recognizing unconscious bias. And I think we've done a lot of reflection in Luton around the population diversity that we have, the churn, the arrival of new communities, and are constantly reaching out to community and faith leaders within those communities to find new voices, to find people who are organising, active, and to bring them into the networks that we're building, and develop their stories as leaders that can promote participation both within their communities and across the town in terms of a positive sense of identity. I mentioned the campaign of Luton in Harmony and the Many Voices One Town narrative, and there was a great film that came out of that with some really strong young leaders profiled. So we would weep watching that film when it came out, and simply because of the integrity and honesty and beauty that they were demonstrating. But all of them were involved in very, very strong pieces of work, whether it was cultural activism, whether it was sport and participation, breaking down barriers and getting their voice amplified within and across their communities, but by the whole town, by the council, is a really important process. It's a really challenging one. It requires you know, a lot of investment, time, resources, and you know, in austerity, that was a very difficult process for us. But I think that's one of the keys for us to keep that process constantly going.
Brilliant. I don't know whether Councillor Ashraf, you want to add anything on that? Otherwise, I can go to the next question. Oh,
I just couldn't unmute myself. So just to add on this, yeah, for us it was more like the summer of festivals, as I don't know if I mentioned earlier. It was like the project Everyone Every Day, which was bringing everyone together. I don't know, I'm just going to give you an example. It's like if someone wants to make a biryani and they ask everyone to come, and you bring the tomatoes, you bring the chicken, you bring the rice. Everybody in the end will learn to cook and take something out, something that would bring people together. Summer of festivals. When I moved to this country, I remember I attended one. It was the Dagenham show, so that was like one big show. Didn't really mean too much to me personally because I was just new there. But since 2014, we reintroduced the Summer of Festivals, which was not one show, but it was a series of shows. So we've got the Folk Festival, we've got the Roundhouse Musical Festival, which is like rocks to the 70s. We've got, the Steam and Cider, believe me, it's funny, but that's my favorite one. And we've got so many others that like the Youth Parade. So we've got a series that actually connects with different variants in the community. And I think that's really important because that means a lot to people. It's not us imposing it. We've got a steering group bringing people, like groups together and resident, where they tell us what they want to see and what they'd like, the theme to that, particular festival. So it has to be owned by the community, by the groups. And I think that's really what was the change for us.
Yeah, and I think there's something definitely in there that kind of building resilience in communities doesn't have to be all about building resilience in communities. Things like Steam and Cider are quite often quite a good vehicle to be able to do some of that. And so we just had a couple of questions which are linked but not necessarily the same. So one is one that we've been thinking a lot about with our Hopeful Towns project. We know that the far right can quite easily find fertile ground where there is quite a distinct sense of loss, where there's deindustrialisation, in places where there's high population churn, where there's deprivation, all of these things that all of our speakers have spoken about. Quite often that also means that community infrastructure is quite weak. So how can individuals engage in communities where there is no sense of community groups or very weak community infrastructure? How can we find courage to start becoming those leaders? And then another question that was quite linked to that, how do we get the right people around the table? Often we have self-elected representatives rather than those that could have the greatest impact. So curious on both of those questions. So anyone from our panel who wants to start? Otherwise I'll pick on you.
Can I
Peter.
start with the last
yeah,
one first?
Yeah, Councillor Ashraf.
So how can we get the right people and to represent or to be at the table? I think that, it's no brainer really. If there is a will, there is a way. And it's just like, what's the agenda there? Is that just a tick the box exercise, or is that you want to make a difference? Because if that's the case, then you need to look in the community. You always have the community leader, and it can be a man or a woman. It can be like any race. Yeah, but that's that person that, likes to come forward, that care genuinely about the community, and really for them, that means a lot to represent. And they might not know on the, themselves that, this is who they are. So a bit of encouragement, looking at the person, like grooming them or talking to them, encouraging them to be part of decision making. And I feel that this was the approach that we took a few years ago as a party. It was to look in the community who the people were that were caring. And that's how people like me ended up where I am today. It's a very example of this. I will leave the others to respond.
May I follow up on that, Councillor? And I think, if talking about infrastructure, I think one of the things that we've realised that as a local authority, that there's an obligation and a responsibility that, as a democratic institution, our councillors are elected as community leaders, but that leadership, how it's exercised, is critical. And the kind of values that you've described, and the approach to being inclusive, to convening a coalition of leadership across the community to encourage other leaders alongside yourself, those are the values that increasingly we are seeing from our councillors and wanting to encourage and develop. So I think where there is a deficit, very often the vulnerability is because the vulnerability to extremism is because that kind of leadership at the grassroots isn't being exercised, and we need as the local authorities to realise that and do a lot more work, I think, around that. The LGA and other colleagues are very supportive in that process of helping councillors and officers to develop strategies, approaches, to have tools and be accountable for that model of leadership. And I think that's one that a network like this is very well placed to help develop as well.
I could come in there as well. I recognise that challenge and problem, and I think it does frustrate me. You get the people who are self-appointed and who have something to bring, but you also then get those who are self-appointed and are promoting self, and that can be a real challenge, especially when they become the go-to media people and so on. I think one of the things I desperately try and do all the time is not cling to place and power myself, but actually try and, out of the networks of relationship I have as somebody who works across the community, to just really try and help others step up. And again, it's about being a good ally, trying to make space for other people, particularly from other groups, other parts of the community which don't have much of a voice. And that's something that, just as local people, we have a real need to do. But at the other times, there are times when actually it may feel, oh, I'm being too pushy, but actually in a desperate situation, in a really difficult situation, we have to step up. I mean, when everything broke out in 2009, I really did not have those ins. I just had one or two, but I had a big voice and I had some answers or some understanding that others didn't have. And actually very quickly that got to be heard. And I suppose it was only later that there was a bit of catch up in terms of making things being done the right way, quote unquote. But actually, sometimes you just have to step up when things are going desperately wrong.
Brilliant. I don't know whether, Paul, you want to add anything on that?
I think leadership's incredibly important, isn't it? In Bradford, I think we're quite lucky. We've got some good councillors and they are good leaders. But I think we have to, it's almost like old-fashioned community development work. Yeah. We need to identify potential leaders and work with people and bring people on and find ways to give people the confidence so that they can become leaders. A strong movement's got lots of leaders. And everyone playing the part. And we're lucky in Bradford, we've got a strong voluntary sector. And one of the things we do at Hope Not Hate is we have, we try and do it once a year. We weren't able to do it last year, obviously, because of plague, but a sort of family fun day where we bring all the different communities in Bradford together and we base it on food and sort of music and what have you. And we were astonished at how many different communities we've got here. Everyone says, oh, it's diverse, but you wouldn't believe how diverse it is until you start. But then you have to go hunting, but allowing everyone their voice and allowing everyone to have their bit. And I think if you've got that attitude, it's a process that throws up leaders and builds confidence in people so that they can lead. Yeah. But leadership's incredibly important, I think, and ultimately there has to be strong leadership that comes from the council. I think in recent times we've been lucky because we've had that.
Brilliant, thanks. I'm just going to bring in a couple of comments as well. I mean, we've had quite a lot on the importance of engaging with schools and young people and youth services. So I think that is a really important thing, but also as part of this series, we're going to be looking at kind of population change as kind of an issue as well. We know that for a lot of our towns, they're struggling with vulnerabilities to the far right because they've got ageing populations, predominantly white British populations getting older. So we're going to be looking at that later on as well. I'm just going to bring in Clarke at this point as well. I mean, we've spoken a lot about kind of responding to some of these issues that arise, and I mean, as Paul said kind of earlier, that it could be as little as 4 people doing something that suddenly kicks off these huge community tensions, and then there's a huge amount of work that needs to go into responding. But as part of our Hopeful Towns project, we're also looking at building resilience in the longer term. So I was hoping Chris could just talk a little bit more about that definition of resilience, and then I'm going to take another couple of questions from the Q&A.
Yeah, on the resilience thing, with the report we did, which is called Understanding Community Resilience in Our Towns, we were quite keen that it wasn't that we used this word resilience as well as talking about cohesion or integration, because one of the things we were quite conscious of was that in communities that weren't particularly diverse, there's a lot of town communities across the country that aren't particularly diverse, but which, under the right circumstance, if there was to be a kind of a flashpoint or a very rapid demographic change in the community, there would be the potential within that community, the dry brushwood, if you like, for things to escalate or for the kind of the far right to gain a foothold. So yeah, we talked about a number of things relating to how confident and welcoming and optimistic an area is, how comfortable it is absorbing change and difference. And yeah, I think that's just an important thing with this debate for us to discuss and emphasize is always that cohesion is about building relations between groups, but also thinking about ways of, you know, in areas that aren't diverse necessarily, thinking about how you can make sure that they wouldn't be vulnerable if changes were to happen or if there was an incident was to happen. It actually relates to a question I was quite keen to ask, which was, I just wondered what the sort of early signs were for some of the local authorities, sorry, not the local authorities, but for some of the speakers on the panel, whether how sort of when these things happened in 2001 in your case, Paul, in sort of 2000 and early 6 sort of time in Buckingham, Dagenham, and in 2009 in Luton, whether how much they came, you know, came as a big surprise versus how much there was a sort of a real awareness that things were bubbling below the surface and these things kind of spilled over. And I was curious, apart from anything else, because I think some of the attendees might be from councils which haven't had the sort of overt tensions we've heard about today, but which might be looking to you know, spot things early rather than later.
Can I come in?
Yeah,
are
ready to...
Oh yeah, in 2009, when the march took place through the town centre of the army, which led to the formation of the EDL, I was standing next to the local town cohesion officer at the time. And we were actually inside the outer police cordon, just within a few yards of where the protesting group were. And he said to me, "Where did this come from?" And I thought, "Oh, you didn't know?" So there was a sense of, we're not really ready yet. We don't know where that's coming from. But actually, I've been in the town, living in the town 2 years, and I was very aware in the white churches, in the white communities, some of the tensions there and senses of what were there. And I think there is a need for an active network that will understand the issues. I think it took us 2 or 3 years to really get up to speed as a town with the things that had led to the formation of the EDL. And what Marek's been describing, you know, in his presentation was very much what's been happening since around 2015, 16. So it has taken some time. but it's that intelligence network, and I think it's using people like me and others who have an understanding, but that has to be done proactively. We have to build those networks of of just sensing what the tensions are in the community.
Brilliant, thanks, Peter. I'm just aware we've only got about kind of 10 minutes left, and we've got a few questions waiting. But Councillor Ashraf, you look like you were just about to say something.
Yeah, just because Chris, you asked, so I don't know if you want me to. I'll very quick. For us in Barking and Dagenham, it was like the lack of jobs, lack of housing, and that disconnect completely. Low aspiration since Ford left. Council is not employing as much. We lost most of the stock of the housing to right to buy. You don't have that what they used to ask you to do. The resident I'm talking about, and that paternalistic approach wasn't. We were not able to deliver at this range. But I mean, not that I was here, but I'm very well aware that the MP had raised, to the party nationally, her concerns well before, but it wasn't really taken seriously until 2006. And that's when we had, the elections of those 11 BNP councillors. And I think that, we have to take also the blame where we have to. When you have, again, I mentioned it earlier, and I might shoot myself on the foot here, but when you have politicians sitting comfortably and not really connecting and trying to listen and deliver, then this is what happened. And I think this is such a lesson that we've learned that we never stopped. So we carry on, and listening is definitely the way forward, because if you can't carry on imposing or just giving it to people the way you want. You need to have your vision, you need to have an aim, you need to be able to connect and share that, because if it's not embraced by if you are a member, by your officers, if you do not have the right team willing to deliver, then you'll be turning around the pot and not achieving much.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to bring in a couple of questions. So we had one from Magdalena. I'm a white ex-child refugee who's trying to unite groups who suffer from the UK hostile environment. I'm European and 3 million plus EU citizens in danger of being the new Windrush. Brexit is part of this divide and rule. How can we unite more? And then there's another question relating to Brexit from Lynn. Can we anticipate problems that may arise when lockdown is lifted and Brexit and COVID consequences become evident? So I think this speaks a lot to what a lot of the panelists have said about the turf on which the far right can kind of take hold and the fertileness of that. And I think with Brexit, we've got that level of division, and that's coming through in both questions. There's also migrants at risk, EU citizens at risk from that. But then we've also got the potential economic consequences about to unfold. And we haven't really talked about coronavirus, which makes a nice change, but that is clearly going to have a big impact on all of this. So I don't know whether anyone wants to take those questions and put some of the lessons that you've learned in the current context.
Shall I dive in, Rosie, on that one? And perhaps on the back of Councillor Saima's message about never stop learning, I think that's absolutely right. Having been galvanized, having seen the consequence of a threat that perhaps we were discounting and a little bit blindsided on, and we weren't really factoring in the social drivers of it, I think we are very mindful never to get caught in the same way again. So with regards to East European communities, particularly in Luton, we've had a huge migration, inward migration in the town, and around 10% of our population recent migration from Eastern European areas, Polish, Romanian particularly, and we're very mindful to be engaging with community organisations and activists within that community, particularly given the kind of threats that we're seeing. And I think what you sort of described what is almost a perfect storm at the moment that we're under, whilst having to deal with the emergencies that Peter touched on, that I'm sure we're all involved in one way or another, around vaccinations and food banks and so on. So it's a hugely challenging moment, but one where we know we have to keep reaching out to people in those communities. So one of the things through through the crisis, and I'm sure many local areas have done this, have been using the power of social media and platforms to convene town-wide conversations with leaders and activists from diverse communities and within diverse communities around, the immediate challenges. But I think that the social capital and relationships that we've actually been able to build up through that process. The APPG on Faith and Society recently did a report on the relationship, for instance, between faith and community groups and local authorities, and how that had been strengthened through the crisis. And I think some of that resilience, although we don't even have the answers and we don't know what's coming down the line, some of those networks and resilience and relationships that we're currently engaged in will bear fruit as we all crawl out, hopefully at some point, from our bunkers and survey what does a new society post-COVID, or kind of post-COVID, semi-post-COVID, because it's not going away, look like. I know that's not really any kind of answer, but it is a reflection on what we're currently going through, perhaps, and maybe other colleagues have got other insights as well, I'm sure.
If I can just add to this, I remember we also having false narratives being spread, such as like some communities are being paid to move to Barking and Dagenham, and we had literally flyers going on saying like Nigerians for Barking and Dagenham, that actually we were paying them to move here, and it's about busting those myths, giving the message right. I think it's really important that, there is that kind of like connection with groups. Again, in Barking and Dagenham, I have to say that we're quite proud, all the work that has been done in the past, 4 or 5 years, especially reconnecting and establishing that collaboration with the, social and voluntary sector, with the faith groups, with different groups. We even before Boris Johnson announced the lockdown, the very first lockdown in March last year, we were ready to, deliver to the community. And that was only because we had that relationship. It took us just 4 days. We called, for a meeting with all those groups, and I'm talking about 86 groups of the borough, and we gave them the figures. We knew, who our shielding people would be. We knew who, the vulnerable in the community, because we had those figures. Would be, and so the community, and that's including the local mosque or the churches, and it can be different churches, Pentecostal or Anglican, name it. They all came together and they became the hubs in the community to deliver, and that was incredible because we've helped over 30,000 people here, all led by the community for the community, and I think that that relationship. Again, I can't stress that enough, and I'm sure that I've put that across quite well. We cannot afford to lose that relationship or to be complacent and start to just relax. It has to be a movement, and groups like Hope No Hate or others, that carry on leading on this and pushing the agenda forward. I think is extremely important. I know that the question about Europeans, and the divide between Brexit and all this, it is something that I'm also very concerned. I'm French, I came here and, I still go back, my family still come and go, but we, as well as like now I'm a very proud British too. So I've got all my, backgrounds following me, but I'm just thinking, it is a concern. There is a lot of myth too. There is a lot of like, and we apprehending a lot of things even prior to them happening. So I think we need to be very careful with what the deals are on Brexit and how it's going to affect us, but definitely have a voice. I don't think that we should just, stay put and take it upon us, because that would definitely, move away from what the country, actually is about. So Yeah,
Thanks so much. Sorry, I'm just conscious that we're just running to the end of time. So thanks so much. I think there's been some quite interesting stuff coming through. We've had a few questions about what can be done in areas with very little diversity. So I just wanted to flag that this is the first in the part of a wider series looking at what works. And this is forming the basis of our town's leadership network. So this is really a network for people to share learning in the same way that we have today. But we're going to be looking at a range of issues. So a date for your diaries. The next session that we'll be running will be on February the 18th, when we're going to be looking at place identity, and that's a huge thing that came up today. So we're going to be learning from partners who have had success in trying to kind of brand their place in a way that is representative, and it can kind of feel quite positive and help to portray some of these things and push back against some of the more negative perceptions that people might have around different places. So I'm just going to hand over now for some closing remarks from Chris, who's just going to tell you a little bit more about the town's leadership network, where you can sign up if you haven't already, and do share it with anyone who you think should be a part of these conversations. So handing over to Chris now.
Yeah, I didn't have many closing comments, Rosie, beyond just saying thank you very, very much to everyone. It was really fascinating to hear those different accounts, and there were some really interesting common themes around importance of partnerships and networks, importance of understanding the root causes of some of this stuff, and above all, really, that role of listening and engaging constantly being the thing that helps get through these issues. As Rosie says, our next webinar will be on the 18th of February. We'll circulate more details about that, but it's going to be on the theme of building a strong place identity and culture. We'll circulate more details about that. But in the meantime, if you haven't already, then please do sign up to the town's leadership network, which you can sign up to at it's hopefultowns.co.uk/network, and please encourage other people at your organisations, both within local authorities and more broadly, to join up, so that we can kind of keep everyone abreast of these future webinars. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, thanks very much, and thanks very much for everyone for such an engaged attendance. It's been really helpful, and a shout out that we've managed to have a very international event, so hello to our participants in Japan. So thanks very much all, and please sign up to the network. The link is in the chat. We'll circulate a recording to everybody who has signed up to that network as well, and stay in touch. Thanks very much. Bye.